name's Amy McElroy. I work at IntroHive and I have been here for a year now. And that this is my first sales job as well. So I actually predominantly prospect into law firms. So maybe I should chat to Armani after this because he'll, I'm sure, have a lot of experience with that. But I also have some experience prospecting into a number of different industries. So I've been to some tech conferences and real estate events as well. So hopefully what I'm saying today is not kind of only working for one industry. But essentially, the topic of my talk today is going to be how to identify pain and do so really quickly, because it's super important as a BDR. Because, you know, learning how to do discovery in a way that works and does so quickly and efficiently, but is also true to your communication style, is really important. And we're kind of going to be talking about that in the context of cold calling. So hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have a bit more insight into how to figure out your style. So some key takeaways from what I'm presenting today is hopefully going to be the importance of discovering pain really quickly, what not to do. I'm going to be talking a bit about my own personal experience there, how to develop your own technique through kind of having a whole learning process, and also how to build a formula that prioritizes pain and value, and that actually quite neatly kind of packaged itself into 4 Ps. So for this discussion about discovery, I'm going to be talking quite specifically about how to do so effectively when making cold calls. So as I'm sure we all know, cold calling is one of the most important skills to have as a BDR. And I, like I'm sure many others on this call, have been quite guilty of neglecting them at times, especially coming from a generation that gets scared to phone the doctor by yourself, never mind calling up a complete stranger. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view it, cold calling is still one of the fastest ways of growing pipeline and qualifying in or out super quickly. So if you're lucky, a prospect will give you a few minutes, which means you need to be able to begin the discovery process super quickly so that you can understand pain and then build enough value to have a follow-up conversation. So at IntroHive, we kind of always say, lose quickly, lose cheaply. And this has kind of become one of our standard mottos. And it applies really strongly to cold calling, I think, because, you know, you only have a few hours in a day where it's polite to cold call someone at work. And even then, your prospect may not agree. So really make the most of the time that you do have. If I move on now to the past mistakes that I made, as you can see here, this is me taking the legal world by storm from a young age. But if we maybe don't look quite as far back as that and look back to my introduction to the world of sales last year. So like probably every other new BDR, I was pretty awful at cold calling when I first started. And after about one sentence, I was listing off every feature and function of IntroHive, whether people wanted to hear it or not. So honestly, I think my colleague Mason may be on this call, but if you want to ask him, I did one of my first ever cold call practices with him, and he will vouch for me. It was horrendous. But this just kind of meant that I had to go on a learning journey. So if we move on to kind of my learning process, it can be split into learning techniques for how I actually reach out to prospects, and also learning the industry that I'm working in and how it works as an ecosystem, so I know what I'm talking about. So if we start with technique, at IntroHive, we use Sandler training, but we do these sessions with the global team, majority of which is actually based in Canada. So our sales trainer is a Canadian man, and as you can see, I am not a Canadian man. So some of the general technique promoted doesn't really roll off my Scottish tongue naturally, but that just meant that I really needed to go searching for some different formats. And I came across Bilal on LinkedIn, who he's a huge sales influencer, so I'm sure loads of you will follow him already. But I came across his problem and provoke method, which really helps you to dive straight into discovery on a cold call. And I'm going to kind of loop back to that a bit later. So then if we move on to industry, so if I'm wanting to go into discovery quickly on a cold call, I need to actually understand some of the common pains within my industry so that I actually have content to speak about. So the way I kind of went about learning that was I went through, previous meetings that people had here at IntraHive, and then kind of sat in on meetings myself. Here we use Gong, so that was a great way of actually seeing, what questions people asked, what pains were coming up time and time again. And also LinkedIn has been super useful to me. So as you can kind of see here, I've got 2 screenshots. Instead of just looking at posts, I found that comment sections were super useful on LinkedIn. So, these 2 people hadn't created posts themselves saying, we have these issues, can anyone help? Instead, they were engaging with other people in the industry, and they were telling quite outrightly, like publicly, they were saying, here is one of my biggest challenges. And it so happens that this is one of my kind of key accounts, and this is a challenge that we can solve quite easily. And then once again here, they're saying like, here's what's challenging. We've done this, but it's not like maybe working so well. And so then I've got the content to actually understand, okay, CRM managers are having trouble with this. People in market are having trouble with this. But yeah, also be just super open to kind of continuously learn. So if we move on to my current process, I've kind of combined a few different techniques with other people's advice and make sure that it suits my personality. So for each persona in the legal space, I basically identified the most common pain that they have. So when I mentioned Bilal's problem and provoke format, this pain would make up the problem part. So because I'm engaging in my industry and I can understand what legal marketers' pain is versus what legal IT's pain is, I can then use that for my problem statement. So stating this problem that resonates with your audience at the start is key. It shows their industry and their frustrations, and can be a great way to quickly build trust because they feel like you know what they go through. So then moving on to the provoke section, I then identified a question that I could ask to understand how they're dealing with this pain. So asking a specific question based on the previous problem statement, it directs the conversation towards discovery and learning more about their business. Also just wanted to mention that continually updating your script based on trends in the market is super important. So one of my colleagues and I, we actually made a cadence of emails and cold call script as well around the Great Resignation, because it was something that we were seeing continual kind of posts about, continual engagement about in the space. So kind of strike while the iron's hot, and added that in as well. So if I then move on to kind of an example of how I'd put this into practice. So this is what I was meaning about 4 Ps. So we've got pattern, interrupt, permission, problem, and provoke. Now these 2 are kind of standard things within cold calling. And then we've got these problem and provoke sections here. And if I just give you a bit of an example around this, funnily enough, I actually just saw Sophie's post this morning about how she was saying she's not quite a big fan of this is a cold call and things like that. But that's the whole point, isn't it? You try different things that work for you, and based on your personality, your delivery, different things will reap different results for individuals, because it's a human industry, isn't it? So one of my examples is for business development in law firms. And so I'd start with my pattern interrupt. So this is a cold call, or you're not expecting my call. And then ask for permission. Do you have even a minute to talk? Tonality is quite key there. And then we move on to the problem. So warm referrals are the most effective way of winning new business, but we see that law firms often don't have an effective way of tracking firm-wide relationships. And then to follow that up, we're going to provoke to get the conversation flowing. So how are you currently tracking relationships in order to increase the success of your work winning process? So that's kind of an example for that one persona. Anyway, to move on to our kind of key takeaways, because I'm coming to the end now. So hopefully from this talk, you've kind of understood a bit about the importance of discovering pain quickly, what not to do, how to develop your own personal techniques, and then how to build a formula that prioritizes pain and value. And thank you very much for all listening to me. And if you want to connect on LinkedIn, this is me. Sorry, I'm pointing at another screen. But yeah, this is me. Connect with me there. If you want to continue the conversation, let's do it. And yeah, thanks for having me.